Welcome to the Beau Show. Last Tuesday, President Joe Biden delivered his very first State of the Union address as president. I want to break this down for you because this contrasts with 4 State of the Union speeches under Donald Trump. So the style and substance are drastically different. And just as stark, the energy, and let's just say the mental acuity and agility, were quite different. The mask mandate in D.C. was dropped just days before this speech, which may have been intentional, as mask mandates have become quite unpopular. Of course, Biden started out with the obvious issue at hand, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Joe Biden's tone was forceful, but more importantly, it sounded forced. Behind his incredibly Botoxed forehead and squinted eyes was a man who sounded bewildered, like someone had said to him, "Make sure you just yell a bit and it'll come across great." There were many verbal fumbles in this speech, and the very first one came early. He said this.
6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined.
They met a mall of people? He also acknowledged the Ukrainian ambassador, and of course, Jill Biden was there to hug her in a very virtue-signaling moment. And after all, who doesn't sympathize with the Ukrainian people right now? People sleeping in subways and innocent civilians killed. And it's hard to know what news to believe because there are so many false flags out there. But Biden's notion that tough sanctions have worked is not just impotent, but false. Biden said that the Russian attack was unprovoked. But was it? NATO has been in Ukraine for quite a while, and Russia has viewed this as aggression. Ukraine literally means on the edge of in Russian. Russia views Ukraine as part of Russia. Putin thinks that the Russian and Ukrainian people are the same people. And Ukraine became part of the Tsarist Russian Empire and later part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine is very poor. It's also very corrupt. But Putin has not forgotten about his desire to retake Ukraine. All that aside, Ukraine is independent. And Joe Biden did nothing to reassure them on Tuesday. Biden talked about the free world, but instead made this blunder.
We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable.
Biden said Putin is more isolated than he's ever been. That's not true. Putin and the Chinese Communist Party chairman Xi Jinping are very much on the same page. Look at what Xi is doing with Taiwan. It's the exact same thing. Putin is doing with Ukraine. A pseudo-alliance, or at least an understanding between them, had to have happened because the United States, especially under Biden, can't handle both at the same time. Biden couldn't even pronounce the name of the Russian currency properly.
Preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble.
Biden says he has seized the Russian oligarchs' yachts and private planes. Oh wow, what a move. He said he's closed off Russian flights and airspace. But didn't he criticize Donald Trump for stopping flights from China when COVID was first breaking out and thereby accuse him of being racist? Biden described the pain of sanctions he has implemented. But it sure doesn't seem like Putin is feeling any pain right now. Uncle Joe said that he has released 30 million barrels of oil in our reserves to help drive our gas prices down. But wait a minute. We used to be energy independent under Donald Trump. We exported more than we imported. So why should we even have to release reserves? Gas prices were high before the Ukrainian conflict. He's just using that as an excuse. Our imports from Russia had already doubled. This is an inconvenient truth. But perhaps the most embarrassing part of Biden's blunders came here.
We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people.
He said the Iranian people? Is he that senile? He's talking about a severe global conflict and he mentioned the wrong country? This would be unconscionable if it weren't Joe Biden. Then Biden pivoted to his American Rescue Plan and drew some loud boos when he said this.
It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people, and left no one behind.
I have to fact check this. The Washington Post gave this statement 3 Pinocchios. Trump's tax plan was not a tax cut for the wealthy. But that didn't stop Chuck Schumer's preemptive exuberance. Then Biden talked about electric vehicles to please his climate change crowd. He said that Intel would be starting a semiconductor plant near Columbus, Ohio. What you might not know is that the lithium that is used for batteries in electric vehicles largely comes from China or some other country that China has under its grip. We do not have the ability to mine rare earth minerals. And how do we dispose of them after 3 to 5 years? Furthermore, if anything were to happen to our grid, or even say some sort of hack or electromagnetic pulse, everyone that has an EV is screwed. This was also a weird thing that Biden said.
So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed.
Beams into building? It just doesn't make sense. He also talked about the pandemic, but called it something else.
The panic also disrupted the global supply chain.
In truth, maybe that was a Freudian slip. It was a panic more so than a pandemic. Fear guided everything. Biden said that the way to fight inflation was to have companies lower their costs, not their wages. But see, he doesn't get it. When you print so much money like he did with his American Rescue Plan, you devalue the dollar. Plus, you have a limited supply of goods already choked by supply chains and a shortage of workers. That drives up cost. But he doesn't see his policies and printed money as the problem. He said he wants to cap the cost of insulin, which I actually agree with. And he pointed out a young boy in the audience who depends on insulin as a type 1 diabetic. But how can Joe Biden, in good faith, talk about Big Pharma when he has bent over backwards for Big Pharma with respect to these vaccines, acting like they are miracle workers? He said that no one making under $400,000 will pay any additional penny in taxes. But what he fails to tell you is that costs get passed down to the middle and lower income levels through inflation, the cost of goods, and lower wages. Who gives a rip about taxes if the money you now make cannot outpace inflation? We did see a fun appearance, though, by a minority out in the crowd representing a Native American tribe. Oh, it's always so good to see Elizabeth Warren. Biden also wants to raise the minimum wage. Well, once again, this does not take into account inflation. What kind of raise would you have to get to outpace inflation? And furthermore, he isn't talking about automation. He's not taking that into account. Companies will begin to replace minimum wage workers with robots because artificial intelligence is getting that good. And it actually may be better than a human. Now, I mentioned to you that masks are optional at this point, which should have been the case all along, since we know that cloth masks don't work. But at least we see Jerry Nadler has one on. Biden doubled down on the vaccines, touting their efficacy, especially if you're boosted. The latest science is showing that's just not true. In fact, as reported in the Epoch Times, former vaccine scientist Joe Wang pointed out that the wrong protein was targeted by these vaccines, and that's why they don't last long. And the Omicron variant is actually the best natural vaccine. After this medically inaccurate information, he pivoted to the 2 NYPD officers who lost their lives being gunned down by a criminal. Rather than calling them patrol officers, he called them this.
That they later chose to patrol as police officers.
I know that patrol and parole sound alike, but their meanings are so different. To that point, he said that we need to hold law enforcement accountable. Now, wait a minute. He just tried to honor 2 fallen police officers who did their jobs valiantly and did nothing wrong, but he wants to place the blame of most of our problems at the feet of law enforcement? What about the guy that killed those 2 cops? What about the looters, the rapists, the assaulters who are getting away with this stuff and getting out all too easily from bad bail laws? What about them? Biden wants to blame cops for the current crime wave? At least, thank God, at least he said we need to fund the police. Even the Republicans stood up. But that's still hypocrisy coming from Biden, who sympathized with the BLM riots. In another surprising lucid moment, he said we needed to fix the border, but adding that we have new scanners to try to detect drugs seems rather paltry, considering the way he has handled the southern border and immigration. He botched that right out of the gate. And once again, he mentioned the Dreamers. Those people who just accidentally got here by virtue of parents that broke immigration laws. No, not the Ukrainian dreamers who have legitimate reason for asylum. We are talking just about the casual strollers over the southern border who made it in and never showed up for court. Biden then also had to mention transgenders and prop that super minority up. He talked about them reaching their God-given potential. But what about their God-given gender? See, it just doesn't make sense. Why bring God even into it if doctors can play God and reassign your gender? Biden addressed the opioid epidemic, which is of course a massive problem, especially with the influx of fentanyl. But he doesn't acknowledge how his failure at the southern border has exacerbated that problem, especially with respect to Chinese-made fentanyl. There has been no pushback. China was barely mentioned in this speech, and you have to wonder why. It was odd that Biden recognized Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, whom he invited to the speech, because Biden has been impotent against big tech. Democrats have allowed big tech for years to influence minds, especially for the benefit of political goals. Mark Zuckerberg most certainly interfered in the electoral process in 2020 with his censorship. Biden also tried to tepidly acknowledge lost soldiers, and it got this reaction.
And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world. Never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those.
I believe that was Representative Lauren Boebert who yelled out 13 of them, referencing the number of lives lost in the Afghanistan withdrawal. Biden made another faux pas here.
Pattern after DARPA in the Defense Department. Projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more that make our forces more safer.
More safer? I don't know if that was actually written into the speech or he misread the teleprompter. Kind of like this stumble as well.
As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity.
Biden says that we are better off today than we were a year ago. Do you think that way? Do you think that's true? Inflation was at 1.5% at the time. Now it's nearing 10%. Wage growth is stagnant. There's a worker shortage. China and Russia are clearly testing us. North Korea did it too. Immigration is not under control. Cities have seen major spikes in violence. Fentanyl and opioids are killing lots of young people. And so then at the end of Biden's 1 hour plus speech, he ends it this way.
Go get him!
Go get him? Does that mean like go get him as in Putin? Or like go get him, Tiger? We don't really know. It was an odd way to end a speech like that, but consistent with other Biden blunders. All in all, it touched on the salient topics we are facing, but offering the wrong solutions and presented oversimplifications and even deliberate omissions of information. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine crisis is far more than meets the eye. Yes, Putin is off his rocker, but it's far more nuanced than that. Ukraine has been used as a pawn by the European Union and the United States to prod Russia. This type of policy was bound to send Putin over the edge. And of course, that means that the poor Ukrainian people with an ailing economy are stuck right in the middle. But Biden won't admit that. Biden attempts to address our economic woes, but doesn't admit that it is his policy failures that have sent inflation through the roof.